Now, today is the 12th of May, 2020. My name is Roger Kitchen, and this is for, well, I don't know whether they're going to call it Lockdown Lives or Milton Keynes in Lockdown Project. And I'm talking to Sam Crooks. Sam, can you please tell me when you were born?
Roger, I was born right at the end of 1946.
Oh, same year as me. But
Really?
I'm a bit old.
You've weathered very well.
So you. Could you tell me where you are living now?
I'm living in Great Linford.
Right, okay. Just going back, obviously this is, you are currently the mayor of Milton Keynes, and I wondered whether the fact that you are still mayor is a consequence of the lockdown. Would you normally not have been mayor at this time?
No. The annual general meeting, which is when I come to an end of my tenure, is next week on the 20th, and that has been the case since I took it over. I knew there was always that date.
Oh right. Oh okay. Can you tell me when did you first hear about coronavirus, and what was your reaction to it when you first heard about it?
I first heard about it probably, I think, over the Christmas period in December last year, simply because I listened to the World Service a lot. And to be honest, I didn't really pay that much attention. I'd had some experience of SARS. I knew about MERS. I'd heard of Ebola, and it sort of registered, but nothing more, that this was an additional thing that we would have to know about. And then gradually it encroached. I think the thing that really brought it home to me is when it came to Italy, France, and Spain, because my wife, as you know, lives in France, and I have a Spanish family in Barcelona. So I was very aware of it coming to Europe.
And does that mean to say that you are, is your wife with you now, or are you apart because of this?
No, my wife is in Paris because her mother is 96, and as an only child, she has to be with her.
So when, in your role as mayor, when did you decide you were going to take action over this? With your daily bulletins and so on. When did that happen and how?
My first daily bulletin, if I remember, was about the 14th of March. So it was before lockdown. But what I was becoming aware of were the number of cancellations that were appearing in my diary. And I thought, if I do nothing else, I will simply publish the list of cancellations so that everybody knows. That went on for 2 or 3 days. And certainly by the following week, it was already becoming formalized. I could see that each update was having a number. I think the thing that most influenced me is that I was born and brought up in Northern Ireland. And so I was there growing up during the early part of the Troubles. And I knew just how important it was that everyone but everybody listened to the BBC for either the 6 o'clock news or, as it was in those days, the 9 o'clock news. Because the paper, there was no social media, obviously, and the papers all supported one side or the other, and therefore weren't in any sense a reliable source of information. But the BBC was. And I just felt that in Milton Keynes, it would be helpful if this got really serious, if there was an unfiltered, non-political, absolutely reliable source of information, publishing only reputable figures and getting its information from the council, the hospital, the police. In other words, sources that you could rely on.
And when you started, were you putting this, how were you distributing this? Was it on Twitter, was it, or Facebook? What were the media that you were using?
Well, the mayor of Milton Keynes, as an official, has 3 outlets. There is a Facebook page, Mayor of MK, there is a Twitter account, and there is an Instagram account. The Instagram I use less. This was mainly a Facebook operation. And so I would publish it every day at 4 o'clock because I felt that was important in terms of the routine and the reliability. And then gradually, as it took shape and the figures went at the top every day, I would then immediately retweet the figures because that was what people were most interested in. How many confirmed cases there were, how many deaths there were.
And in terms of the people who've been following you, how has that grown since the 14th of March?
Quite extraordinary. On the 14th of March, I had about 260 followers. Now it's up to very nearly 4,000. But the reason for that is because of the sharing. And it gets regularly shared, for example, onto Community Hub, which is 24,000. The council's own Facebook page is 15,000. So I am a kind of a minnow in that context. But it does certainly get around the city because of that process of sharing and to a lesser extent tagging.
And to what extent, I mean, you're saying that, if you like, there's the council, the hospital, the police, but I know, because I'm a trustee of Community Action Milton Keynes, that you've been making contact with them as well. To what extent have you been kind of networking again as this has gone on? Because as you say, this reliability, this kind of unvarnished truth, as it were, is so important at the moment when there's so much other stuff. But you've gone further than just those sources, haven't you?
Yes, I mean, if you take Community Action, that's a very good example. We interchange. Every Monday, I publish their regular update, which is magnificent. I would want to pay tribute to it. It's absolutely splendid. They have asked me regularly to do two further things. First of all, to publish and to republish your request for people to fill in the survey that you've launched. But also you have another part on the website where you ask for people's good news stories. And so I publish that opportunity as well. But the critical thing is that Monday morning update. The other thing that I do is I look at your updates not the regular update that comes out on the Mondays, but during the course of the week you publish other information about
daily
sources. And I sometimes repeat those. For example, today I've got MenCap. Yesterday it was sign language. Things that I think will be of interest to a wider readership that perhaps Community MK itself is not getting through to.
And who else have you been liaising with as this has gone on?
I do like the word liaising, Roger, because sometimes I unashamedly just simply quite plagiarize.
That's good. But I mean, for example, the Community Foundation have been offering grants, to groups that are working with people who are suffering from this sort of the pandemic. Have you been publicising those things as well?
Yes, when I know of them. I started off by, as you know, the Community Foundation established a fund with the council. And so the first couple of weeks I was publicising that a lot. And then gradually, as the first grants came through, Hayley Bruton would forward me the details, because what was really impressive was just how quickly they were dealing with them. And an application might come in on a Monday, and the money would be in the bank account by Friday, which I think is remarkable. And so certainly I've been publicising that. I keep a close eye on MKFM and on The Citizen, because there again, they have access to press releases that I don't. And so if I spot something that's interesting, certainly I will use that again. In fairness, I do acknowledge it.
Yes. So, I mean, because obviously your role, almost like the things you would be doing, I mean, your diary, presumably before this, was just filled with 2 or 3 or more visits and activities a day, to now not being able to go and visit all those organisations and everything else. You're doing it in a kind of a virtual way, in a way, aren't you?
Well, in 2 ways, yes. There are 2 ways in which the virtual side is now coming out. First of all, I go into the council each Wednesday and I make videos for the various organisations that I wasn't able to get to. so they have something that they can use on Ramadan radio, for example, or the Alliance Française were having a get-together that was cancelled, so did a message for them. But the other thing is that Zoom appointments are now creeping in. You're an example. Another one is the song that Music at MK recorded. I'm visiting a school on Friday by Zoom. And so this is, I think, a new way that we are all having to, it's a new technique that we're all learning.
Do you think, I mean, what do you think the effect will be, particularly with Zoom, the way it has, as I say, it's completely transformed the meeting thing, hasn't it? That so many people now do it because they can't meet up otherwise. Do you think that will have, in the role of mayor, do you think that will be ongoing when all of this is over, or do you think that'll just disappear into the background and it'll be back to face all the time?
I think it depends a little bit on the nature of the organization, what will happen in the future in terms of these virtual techniques, whether it's Zoom or Google Meet or Microsoft Teams or Skype. I mean, I'm learning there are just so many different things on there. I think the general thing for individuals is that we'll go online. I did use Amazon beforehand, but nothing like the scale that I do now. And I'm sure that's got implications for how we shop. I think there will be some organizations within businesses who will see the opportunity of cutting down significantly on travel expenses by just holding a Zoom meeting. So I can see that happening. There will, I think, be more difficult decisions for organizations that face the public. And if you take the council, for example, we're Zooming at the moment for our meetings. You could say, that's great, just continue Zooming, except that we have a legal obligation to admit the public. And so where you have, I think, an organization that has that public responsibility, we will go back to face. So I don't think you can generalize. It's a question of seeing what best suits a particular organization or company.
What has most impressed you in the reaction in terms of people or organizations in Milton Keynes since the pandemic, since the lockdown, really? I mean, you've had a lot of, you've heard a lot, seen a lot. What's impressed you most?
I think the thing that has impressed me most is quite simply the way that people have responded. I know we could fill out the rest of this interview with me just actually listing some of the organizations that I know have been helping and what they've done. And that's incidentally, one of the things that the community action that we mentioned earlier have been so helpful on, because they do have a master list and keep publicizing it. But for me, one of the most impressive strap lines, which captures that flavor, is MK3 in West Bletchley, which are running a little community group, which says simply, local people helping local people. And that's at the heart of it. The second thing that has impressed me has been the way that the statutory organizations have turned their great liners around to do something different. I mean, if I take the council, for example, an organization, a very, very large organization, and let us face it, very set in its ways. But the immediate grant to the Community Foundation, the immediate Neighbours Guide with the community action, the establishment of the food bank extra at Saxon Court, the way in which the things are gradually closed within the council, like the library staff, were transferred to help the food bank in Saxon Court, the way in which our drivers went over to deliver food, the way in which we got names from the NHS and started telephoning them. We sent letters to everybody who was over the age of 75, and the only way we knew them was because they weren't entitled to serve as jurors. It was things like that that I think statutory organizations got on top of as well. The hospital is another example. I think that showing Ross Kemp in was a very courageous thing to do. and widely appreciated. The police have been very understanding as well. I learnt the word proportionate when it came to the question of what we could do on VE Day. And finally, 6 of us were at the Bletchley War Memorial. Not in any sense authorised, but regarded as proportionate. So those are my 2 stances, I think, the wonderful response of ordinary people and also the response of the statutory organisations.
Yeah. What's been the most challenging thing for you in this time?
In the context of lockdown?
Yeah.
I think the most challenging thing for me has been meeting a deadline. I've learned what a journalist must feel when I come to about 3:20 and I realise that this has to go out at 4 o'clock, and my tummy ever so slightly just begins to turn over when I recognise I haven't yet done either the headlines and finally.
And I mean, it is. Are you doing this 7 days a week or 5 days a week? Is it?
No, I do it 7 days.
Wow.
6 days is new information, and then on Sunday it's the omnibus edition, when I go through the previous 6 days and pick out the things that are the most important.
Wow. And in terms of your life, your own personal life, how has things changed? How's your life? I mean, obviously you were able to get out and about, but I'm just wondering about cooking, things like that. How has it changed for you personally? Your wife's not there. You're on your own, presumably, are you? I mean, it's a very different kind of situation.
Yes, my daughter teases me about the cooking that you asked about, because she's in New York. And every night, just about now, I get a WhatsApp with photographs of what she's having for lunch. She and my wife are extraordinarily talented cooks. My wife is French. And I just exist on cereal for breakfast, a sandwich for lunch, and whatever I can find in the fridge for tea.
So, I mean, the other thing is that, again, personally, you're just saying one of them is in New York, which has been, again, an epicenter of this in America. And the other one is in Paris, which has had a pretty hard time. Has your anxiety levels gone up in this time?
It did about my daughter, not about my wife, because the French rules were very, very strict indeed. If she wanted to go outside, excuse me, she had to pull a form off the internet and fill it out, and then go outside, and that said, what is the purpose of your visit, and which route will you follow to your destination? And so if she was going to a pharmacy or to buy food, which are the only 2 reasons that you were allowed to go out, you weren't even allowed to exercise, she had to be armed with her identity card and that piece of paper. And in France, the wearing of face coverings was also strongly recommended. And she didn't go on public transport because where we live in Paris, it's well served by shops. There was also within the shops very, very strict social conditioning, as has developed here. By contrast, New York, although they were announcing these terrible figures, was much, much more relaxed. And my daughter is in a flat with 2 other people, and at the kind of age when there's no real, well, you remember what we were like, Roger. There's no real concept of risk. You just assume that you're impregnable. And I was very worried that even if she were being sensible, perhaps one or the other of her 2 roommates might not be.
Yeah. But
so yes, anxiety levels have gone up.
Yeah. What have you missed most during the lockdown so far?
People. I used to love getting out. I used to love the engagements. I used to love meeting all the people that I met. And I used to love seeing what was going on. I thought I knew this city. and I've lived here since 1970. But I've discovered people and organizations and activities I knew absolutely nothing about. So it's been a wonderful learning journey. And the most exciting part of that has been the astonishing range and talent and vibrancy and energy of the people that are here.
Yes, I noticed that when I've watched you at events where you have been, you do go out of your way to go and talk to people. It's almost to the extent that you're sometimes late to get up and deliver the speech because you go out there and sort of dive in.
Roger, I'm Irish. I'm not like you study English.
Very good.
I remember, it was a half serious point. I remember my mother coming over here for the first time to visit me way back in the 70s. And we went for a walk on one of the first redways. And people passed us. And they didn't smile. They didn't talk. They didn't say hello. They just went past. And that in Ireland is unthinkable. You always smile at somebody. If you see them, you pass the time of day just for a couple of minutes. Not over here, you don't.
No. And
you reply to that.
what I was going to say was, I mean, you haven't been able to have the face-to-face stuff. Does that mean to say that, I mean, I've got a wife who normally hates the phone, but through this, she's been on that phone. I mean, there's some people, there's an old chap up the road, 92, 93, who she phones twice a day, but also contacting family and everything else. A lot more of that. Have you been doing that? You know, using either Zoom or Skype or phone. Have you found you've done a lot more of that than you would normally have done?
Probably Skype and WhatsApp, yes. But not an extraordinary amount, because my social media contacts of that kind are always fairly active anyway. The issue I found is rather more. The Facebook is a wonderful way of finding out where people are. And so I've looked back on some of my early friends here in the 70s and early 80s, and I'm actually just wondering, dare I sort of press a key that says voice from the past? Do remember me?
Yeah. It's interesting that for a lot of us, it's been a time of kind of reflection, this enforced lockdown, a time to sort of think, you know, well, when this all comes to an end, I want to change things. And I mean, and we've heard it, haven't we? We've, you know, about inequality in society, that you know, that can we go on and have those, and this is the bigger scale, but it could, but also people saying, well, I don't know whether I'm going to commute anymore, or you know, am I going to, I've taken up, you know, a new hobby, or I'm riding my bike more, I'm getting out more, I'm doing more gardening, and after this is over, I'm going to change. Have any of those kind of reflections, have you had any of those kind of reflections about how life might be different to what it is now for you?
I've had two kinds of reflection. There's a personal one, and then there's one in terms of my wider role as a counsellor. If I take the personal one first, my wife and I were always quite clearly agreed that once the 20th of May was passed, I had to address what was in the attic, which is 40 years of my life. I could probably show you letters that I wrote you way back in the 70s, because I have a proverbial squirrel. And the deal between us was, if I were going to be mayor for a year, there had to be a further year getting rid of 40 years. And to some extent that has started early. But I would say, and I think this is a tribute to the city, I would say that one of the things that really slows me up doing it is the memories it brings back. I mean, the sheer excitement of being here in the 70s and 80s. And I mean, as you will know from your background, that incredible development corporation and all it did for this city. You know, there are times I say, I can't throw this out. Or alternatively, I would have to sit down and read it again before it goes. The issue of reflection that arises from that is, why do I want to keep what I want to keep? Is it because I hope still to be here in 10 years' time and will want to read it again? Or is it because I think that my wife and daughter will want to read it? Or do I want to create some kind of legacy because I'm vain or whatever? So I think that the issue of what you keep is actually quite important in terms of how you look back and regard the life that you've had. For the wider role, the counsellor role, I'm worried about the number of people who say to me, when are we going to get back to normal? I don't want to get back to normal. It worries me the way in which I believe that over the last decade or two, we've drifted away from our understanding of some very fundamental values towards a situation where we measure everything, and most often by price. And I think the challenges that the present situation has brought up are, first of all, the realization that the people who are most important in our lives, nurses, care assistants, and so on, are those for whom we gave only the most cursory of thoughts up until now. And an example I've been quoting in another context is that my own mother, her carers are on 0-hour contracts, and she lives in Cumbria, and therefore they've got a lot of travelling between each one of their calls. They have to pay for their own petrol. That's, I think, as a society, we have to ask ourselves how we can allow that to happen, and what have we done to our values that that's the situation. I think the other thing is the way in which we have learned that there are many others who also matter in our lives on whom we're dependent. And I was shock rigid in Tesco the other day. Behind the screen, there was a young woman, very young woman, who was packing my purchases, or so putting them under the scanner. And I said to her, making conversation as one does, I said, "Are you nervous?" pointing to the screen. And she said, "I'm really frightened." And that stopped me in my tracks. She was frightened so that I could eat. So I think that's the other thing we've learned, just how many postal workers, delivery drivers, binmen, shop assistants, a whole range of people who, again, we have taken so much for granted. An example, I think, just to build on that point, is that in the middle of the last war, and contrary to my daughter's belief, I don't remember it, in the middle of the last war, William Beveridge published the big social insurance paper in 1942, and Rab Butler published the Education Act in 1944. They had a vision of what kind of society they wanted after the war. And so I would want to see us look forward, not to go back to normal, but look forward and establish our vision for the society that we want to take forward during the year or two that we've got to wait until we get a vaccine. And during that year, to try and understand how we value people, and then to recognize them and to pay them accordingly. Sorry for such a long-winded answer.
Oh no, it's absolutely fantastic. I mean, it made me think that, whether we are in a similar, because it's been so dramatic, in our two lifetimes, we didn't have anything like a war or anything like that. This is the biggest thing, really, in terms of disruption in our lifetime, this COVID-19 pandemic. And I just wondered, as you say, after the Second World War, out of it came the National Health Service, the New Towns Act, the Education Act, and also, that surprise, I suppose, at one, looking at it from afar, here was Winston Churchill, the great war leader, who, when the election came up, in 1945 did not win because people wanted something different in terms of the tone. Do you think in that respect, I mean, what you're saying, I mean, I must say I feel very similar about it, but is that too optimistic a view, or do you think that politicians, whatever the party is, will have to change to take account of that kind of feeling that you've had, and I'm sure many other people share as well?
I think it depends what their constituents are saying to them, because one of the reasons that is often Churchill's defeat is often attributed to the work of the education corps within the forces during the war, and the way in which they were explaining to soldiers, sailors, airmen, an alternative view of society. And it's felt that the very, very sizable male forces vote was one of the factors that swung that election. I think the same thing could happen here, provided there is a grassroots groundswell for something to happen, because politicians will respond to that as they come up to the next election.
Okay. Well, I don't want to go on forever, but I could. What are you looking forward to most when the lockdown stops?
What am I looking forward to when the lockdown stops? That's a difficult question, because I don't see it stopping straight away. I see a long period until a vaccine is formulated, produced, and given to us, whereby we get used to the status quo in terms of social distancing. So it might well be a year or two yet before things change dramatically. And it's hard to anticipate that. I think what I look forward to is that I do enjoy meetings. I enjoy the task of trying to persuade people to do what I want them to do. I enjoy the challenge of that. And if that doesn't come back relatively quickly, I will miss it. I enjoy socializing. I like going out for meals, the things that at the moment we can't do. Those, I think, are very, very mundane things. I am actually gaining them, I should say, and I hope that this doesn't stop. I'm doing much, much more reading. And I hope that, well, actually, it's both reading and DVDs. I've always said they're the books that I will read and they're the DVDs I will watch. Because again, my wife and my daughter say cheerfully, it's the biggest unread library in the world. And I can honestly say that I have addressed that. I hope that the task of socializing again, this pleasure of socializing again, doesn't mean that I stop reading and watching my DVDs.
I was going to say, are there any DVDs or books that you are not reading because of the kind of atmosphere of at the moment? I mean,
I've always enjoyed biographies, diaries, letters, whodunits. And so at the moment I'm moving between P.D. James, Colin Dexter, and Michelle Obama. And also a chap called Hobhouse, Inside Asquith's Cabinet. But it's the DVDs I've definitely changed. I mean, 10 years ago, I might have watched Saving Private Ryan. Now I find it hard to watch violence. I'm afraid I've sunk into rom-com and costume drama and things like that.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you.
I must be getting old, Roger.
No, well, thank you so much for that. I will stop the recording now.